Mark never expected a single phone call to shatter the foundation of his marriage. When Emily's boss casually asked why she had called in sick instead of attending the company conference, something inside him tightened. He checked her location, telling himself it was just to ease his mind, but the truth hit harder than he imagined. She wasn't at the conference. She wasn't even out of town. Her phone was pinging from a hotel just 15 minutes away. Mark opened the shared credit card statement, and there it was, an overnight charge from the same hotel made only hours earlier. His chest felt hollow as he scrolled through more details, each one confirming what he didn't want to believe. Emily had lied. Not once, not twice, but through an entire fabricated story meant to keep him in the dark. And now, with every new piece of evidence, Mark realized he was standing at the edge of a truth that would change everything. Mark sat in his car for nearly 10 minutes before he could bring himself to move. The hotel address blinked on his phone screen like a cruel confirmation he couldn't escape. He kept telling himself there had to be another explanation, some misunderstanding, something that didn't involve betrayal. But deep down, he knew the pieces were already forming a picture he didn't want to see. He drove past the hotel slowly, eyes scanning the parking lot even though he wasn't sure what he expected to find. Emily's car was there, parked near the entrance, unmistakable even from a distance. Mark gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't storm in or demand answers. He simply drove away, because he knew that whatever conversation came next needed to be controlled, documented, and protected. Back home, the quiet felt unnerving. He opened the shared credit card, account with trembling hands. The charges were all there in cold, unemotional numbers. Room service, a bar tab, a room upgrade fee, all within the last 12 hours. Each transaction felt like a blow to the chest. It was betrayal in itemized form. Mark took a deep breath and called David, his longtime friend and a divorce attorney known for being both ruthless and precise. When David answered, Mark didn't sugarcoat anything. He explained the situation calmly, almost clinically, as if detaching himself from the emotions made it easier to breathe. David listened without interrupting. When Mark finished, there was a long pause before David spoke. He told him to stay calm, gather evidence, and avoid confronting Emily until everything was legally prepared. Mark agreed. He didn't trust himself to have a rational conversation with her anyway. After the call, Mark walked into the bedroom he once shared with Emily and stared at the space that now felt foreign. He opened her closet, her drawers, her nightstand. Every piece of clothing, every bottle of perfume, every neatly folded scarf felt like a lie-wearing fabric. He began packing her things methodically. Not angrily, not hastily, but with a cold, steady purpose. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. He boxed everything, labeled it, and placed all the luggage by the front door. He removed her toothbrush from the bathroom. He took her photos off the wall. He gathered every trace of her presence and set it aside, leaving the house strangely clean, strangely empty, strangely peaceful. When he finished, Mark sat on the couch and stared at the untouched stack of papers David had emailed him, the preliminary divorce documents. He saved them to his desktop, printed them, and placed them on the dining table where Emily would see them the moment she walked in. He added the final detail, her wedding ring box, the one she claimed she had misplaced weeks earlier, but had actually left in her purse during a girls' night out. By the time he locked the door behind him and walked out, Mark no longer felt confused. He no longer felt terrified of what he might discover. He knew the truth. And now he was preparing for the moment Emily would have to face it too. Emily returned home that evening humming softly, still absorbed in the fabricated story she had crafted for Mark about her long conference day. But the moment she unlocked the door, her voice died in her throat. The house was silent. Too silent. She stepped inside, expecting to hear the TV or smell dinner or at least see Mark's work bag by the couch. Instead, her eyes landed on the neatly arranged suitcases lined up by the door. Her suitcases. For a moment, her mind refused to understand what she was seeing. She walked deeper inside, confusion tightening around her like a vice. The walls were bare, where their couple photos once hung. Her perfume was gone from the bathroom counter. Her shoes, every pair, were missing from the rack. And then she saw it. On the dining table, under the soft yellow light, lay a stack of papers and a small velvet ring box. Her heart lurched. She already knew what they were before she even reached them. Emily snatched up the papers with shaking hands. The first line made her stomach drop. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her throat closed. This had to be a mistake. A joke. Some dramatic misunderstanding that Mark would laugh about once she called him. She fumbled for her phone. Her fingers could barely press the screen. She dialed Mark over and over. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Nothing. She paced the living room in growing panic. "What are you doing, Mark? What is this?" she whispered to herself, voice trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. She texted him. A simple, "Call me." Then a longer one, "We need to talk, please." Then another, "This isn't funny." Within minutes, her messages shifted tone. Denial hardened into anger. She demanded explanations, accused him of overreacting, insisted that nothing was going on. Her rage poured out through frantic paragraphs, attacking him, questioning his sanity, questioning his loyalty. But still, no response. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, casting pale light into the living room where Emily now sat curled on the couch, clutching the divorce papers like a lifeline. Her messages took a new form. Desperation. She apologized. She begged. She promised she could explain everything, even though she had no explanation that wouldn't expose the truth. When those didn't work, she tried bargaining. She swore she would be better. She swore they could fix it. She swore she loved him. Then, as exhaustion settled in, her texts grew quieter, sadder, fragmented by fear and guilt. She typed long confessions about how she made a mistake, about feeling lonely, about wanting to start fresh. But she still avoided the one thing Mark needed to hear, actual honesty. Finally, around mid-morning, Mark sent a single message. It contained only one line. A cold, heavy reminder she had forgotten existed. The prenup stands. Emily froze. Her breath hitched. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her. All the anger, bargaining, and excuses evaporated instantly. That one sentence shattered whatever illusion of control she thought she still had. Her messages shifted again, this time into outright collapse. She begged Mark not to go through with it. She swore she would do anything. But by then, the silence on the other side of the phone made everything clear. Mark wasn't arguing. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't negotiating. He was done. And Emily, for the first time, realized the consequences of her choices were no longer something she could outrun or talk her way out of. They were here. They were real. And they were just beginning. Mark spent the next morning in a sort of numb silence, answering work emails mechanically, while his mind replayed the chaos of the night before. He hadn't responded to Emily again. He didn't plan to. Instead, he focused on gathering every piece of information David told him he would need. That was when an unfamiliar number appeared on his phone. He almost ignored it, but something made him swipe to answer. A quiet, measured voice introduced herself as Sarah. Then she said a name that made Mark straighten instantly. Brian. The same name that appeared on the hotel ledger. The same name Emily had mentioned once, casually, as a friend from the gym. Sarah wasted no time. She told Mark She had reasons to believe her husband was having an affair, and that he might have been involved with Mark's wife. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It carried a steadiness that only came from someone who had cried all their tears already. She asked if they could meet. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere quiet. 2 hours later, they sat across from each other in a small cafe. Sarah looked exhausted but composed, her eyes sharp with a kind of painful clarity. She placed a folder on the table between them. Mark didn't reach for it right away. He wasn't sure he wanted to see more proof. But Sarah opened it herself and slid the first page toward him. It was a hotel receipt. Different date. Different city. Same 2 names. Mark felt the weight settle in his lungs. Sarah continued speaking. She explained that she had spent weeks tracking Brian's lies, noticing patterns, uncovering hotel bookings, rideshare logs, and messages he thought he had deleted. She pushed forward photos taken from security cameras, screenshots of emails, and text messages filled with flirtation and secret arrangements. Some dated back months. Some as recent as 3 days ago. Mark stared at the evidence in silence. He didn't rage. He didn't swear. He simply nodded, as if each new page confirmed something he had already accepted. But one detail caught his attention more than the rest. The gifts. Brian had been buying Emily things, jewelry, a designer bag, a spa trip, and charging them all to Sarah's credit card. He wasn't successful. He wasn't ambitious. He wasn't anything Emily had claimed. He was living off his wife's income, spending her money to impress someone else. Sarah's expression softened when she saw the disbelief in Mark's eyes. She admitted she had confronted Brian that morning. He denied everything. Then he blamed her. Then he stormed out. She said she wasn't sure if she wanted him back anymore. But she wanted Mark to know the full truth. Mark finally exhaled. It felt like letting go of something he'd been holding far too tightly. He thanked her, genuinely, and offered to share anything she needed for her own legal protection. Sarah nodded, grateful, though both knew gratitude couldn't mend the damage either of them had suffered. As they stood to leave, Sarah hesitated and said something that stayed with him long after. She told him Emily had looked at Brian like he was some sort of escape, some fantasy of a better life. But in reality, Emily had been chasing a man who couldn't even stand on his own 2 feet without leaning on someone else. When Mark walked back to his car, he felt no pity, no confusion, no lingering hope that the past could be salvaged. Emily had traded her marriage for an illusion. Now the illusion had shattered. And whatever she wanted from Mark next, he already knew the answer. She would get nothing. Emily woke up the next morning feeling like her entire world had slipped out from beneath her, but she still believed she had time to fix things. She thought she could talk her way out of it, explain enough, twist the story just right so Mark would hesitate. But that illusion vanished the moment her company emailed her demanding an urgent meeting. She arrived at the office wearing the same clothes she had curled up in the night before. Her supervisor and HR were already waiting. They asked about the conference. They asked why she hadn't shown up. They asked why her company card had been used in a hotel nowhere near the event venue. Emily tried to lie, then stumbled, then contradicted herself 3 times in a row. The decision was immediate. She was terminated on the spot for dishonesty and misuse of company resources. No severance. No references. Just a security escort to the door. As she walked out of the building, her phone buzzed nonstop. Not from Mark. From her mother. Then her sister. Then her aunt. Emily had called them the night before, sobbing, spinning half-truths for sympathy. Now her family was in full crisis mode. They demanded to know what Mark had done. They insisted he was overreacting. They insisted they needed to fix this. Within hours, they were on Mark's front lawn, pounding on the door and shouting accusations into the neighborhood air. Mark was at work, so his neighbor texted him a video of the chaos. Emily's mother screaming, her brother threatening, her family shoving the door as if they could force their way inside. It was a spectacle, humiliating and loud. When Mark received the video, he forwarded it to David without a word. David instructed him to stay at work, avoid confrontation, and let security handle it. The police were eventually called, and Emily's family was warned to leave the property. They left angry, humiliated, and even more determined to blame Mark for everything. Meanwhile, Emily, spiraling, made another desperate choice. She attempted to log into Mark's bank account from her phone. She still knew his old password combinations, and she tried them one after another, hands trembling with increasing urgency. What she didn't know was that Mark had already updated every password the night before. After 5 failed attempts, the system locked the account and sent Mark an alert that someone was trying to breach it from Emily's device. Mark forwarded that alert to David too. David responded instantly, advising him to file a police report. Mark did. It took less than 10 minutes. 1 form. 1 signature. 1 more nail in the coffin of Emily's dwindling credibility. That afternoon, 2 officers knocked on Emily's door. They didn't arrest her. Not yet. But they warned her. They documented the incident. They explained that attempting to access someone's financial accounts without permission was a criminal offense. Emily tried to cry her way out of it, insisting she just needed to see something and that it was all a misunderstanding. The officers weren't moved. When they left, Emily sank onto the floor in stunned silence. Everything she touched was falling apart faster than she could grab at it. Her marriage was collapsing. Her job was gone. Her reputation at work was destroyed. Her family was making things worse. And now police were involved. For the first time, she realized that what she was facing wasn't just emotional fallout. It was legal, financial, social, and personal destruction all converging at once. She had thought she could control the narrative. But now, every consequence was spiraling beyond her reach, and there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming next. Emily spent the following days in a haze of panic and humiliation, but instead of slowing down, she doubled her efforts to regain control. She couldn't accept that the situation was slipping away from her. She couldn't accept that Mark wasn't answering. And above all, she couldn't accept being the villain of her own story. So she crafted a new one. She opened a blank blog page, her hands shaking as she began typing. She painted herself as a woman trapped in a cold, loveless marriage. She claimed Mark had manipulated her, isolated her, broken her down over the years. She published dramatic posts about emotional imprisonment and reclaiming her freedom. None of it was true, but the drama made her feel powerful again. For a moment, she felt like she had an audience, someone who might believe her side. But her family took it even further. Her mother printed out screenshots of the blog and marched straight to Mark's company. She barged into the lobby shouting accusations, insisting Mark was abusive, insisting Emily was a victim. Employees stared. Security rushed in. The entire scene escalated until her family was physically escorted out of the building. Mark received a call from corporate security minutes later, informing him of the incident. He thanked them calmly, though inside he felt a mix of anger and disbelief. He forwarded the report to David. David added it to the growing stack of evidence. Every incident made their case stronger. Meanwhile, Emily's blog was gaining traction in the worst possible way. Not from supporters, but from people who recognized inconsistencies in her story. Some readers pointed out that her timeline didn't make sense. Others noted that her posts contradicted things she had publicly shared about Mark over the years. Within hours, the comment section turned against her. She deleted entire paragraphs, rewrote others, tried to salvage the narrative, but the damage was done. And just when things seemed like they couldn't get more chaotic, Brian showed up. He arrived at Mark's house at dusk, packing nervously before knocking on the door. Mark wasn't home, but his neighbor recognized Brian from earlier confrontations and called Mark immediately. Mark told him not to engage. Still, Brian lingered until Mark returned. When Mark pulled into the driveway, Brian rushed toward him, hands raised as if surrendering. He apologized profusely, stumbling over his words. He insisted he never meant for things to go this far. He said Emily was emotionally intense, that she was misreading things, that she was creating problems he couldn't handle. Then he said the most absurd thing Mark had heard so far. He asked Mark to take her back, not for love or reconciliation, but so Brian could have his life back. He claimed Emily was blowing up his phone, showing up at places she shouldn't, demanding answers, demanding commitment he never promised. He said she was scaring him. He said she was ruining his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, someone he now wanted to return to. He wanted Mark to fix her, as if Emily were a problem that needed transferring back to its original owner. Mark stared at him in disbelief. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply told Brian to leave and never come back. Then he locked the door behind him and stood in the quiet entryway, marveling at how completely everything had unraveled for Emily. Outside, Brian walked away quickly, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid Emily might appear at any moment. Inside, Mark finally allowed himself a small exhale, knowing that every outburst, every lie, every desperate act from Emily and her family only strengthened the truth he was preparing to present in court. And somewhere across town, Emily was still refreshing her blog, still rewriting her story, still clinging to the belief that she could win back the narrative. But the world she had built out of lies was already collapsing, and there was nothing left to hold it up. The courtroom felt colder than Mark expected, a wide, echoing space where every whisper seemed to travel. Emily sat across the aisle from him, shoulders hunched, makeup faded, eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She looked nothing like the confident woman who once believed she could spin any situation to her favor. Beside her, her attorney shuffled papers nervously, already aware that the case was slipping through their fingers. Mark kept his composure as David, calm and meticulous as always, arranged their documents into neat stacks. When the judge entered, both sides stood. Emily kept her gaze low, avoiding Mark's eyes completely. The hearing began with procedural formalities, but it didn't take long for the judge to invite opening statements. Emily's lawyer spoke first. He tried to paint her as overwhelmed, confused, emotionally distressed. He claimed she had made mistakes, but argued the marriage was still salvageable. He implied that Mark was acting out of anger. He danced around the subject of infidelity without ever acknowledging it directly. Emily nodded subtly at every point, desperate for any narrative that softened her actions. Then it was David's turn. He stood with steady confidence and presented a simple, direct truth. He outlined the timeline. He referenced the hotel charges, the location data, the credit card statements. He explained Emily's lies to her employer. He presented the incident at Mark's workplace involving her family. He mentioned the attempted access to Mark's bank account. Every sentence built upon the last, forming a wall of undeniable facts. When he placed the folder of evidence on the judge's bench, the room fell utterly silent. Inside were photos, receipts, email logs, security footage timestamps, every breadcrumb gathered from weeks of unraveling the truth. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, frowning deeper with each turn. Emily's attorney objected several times, claiming irrelevance or exaggeration. The judge overruled each objection, one by one, firmly. Then came the statements from Sarah. She was called on video, calm and composed, explaining her side. She confirmed the affair. She confirmed Brian's spending habits. She confirmed the timeline matched perfectly with Mark's evidence. Emily visibly shrank in her seat, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Next, the corporate HR report was read aloud. Then the police warning report. Every document painted the same picture: deception, recklessness, escalation. Finally, when asked if she wanted to testify, Emily stood shakily. Her voice cracked on the first sentence. She tried to deny the affair. She tried to shift blame. But under cross-examination, every inconsistency was exposed. Every half-truth crumbled. Within minutes, she collapsed into incoherent excuses. The judge leaned back, exhaling heavily. When she spoke, her voice carried finality. She stated that the evidence overwhelmingly favored Mark. She ruled that the prenuptial agreement was fully enforceable. Emily would receive no marital assets, no support, no compensation. She would, however, be required to pay Mark's legal fees in full. Emily stared ahead in stunned silence, her lips parted as if she couldn't breathe. Her attorney tried to whisper something reassuring, but she wasn't listening. The weight of the ruling hit her all at once. This wasn't a bad argument, a temporary separation, or a fight she could manipulate. This was the end, final and complete. Mark remained still as the judge dismissed the case. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. Not victory. Not triumph. Just release. As everyone stood to leave, Emily finally lifted her eyes toward him. There was no anger left, no fire, no attempt to twist the truth. Only defeat. Only the realization of everything she had destroyed with her own hands. Mark walked out of the courtroom without looking back. For the first time in months, the air outside felt light. The sky seemed brighter. The noise of the city sounded normal again. The past was behind him, sealed and closed. And whatever waited ahead, he knew it was finally his to build, without lies, without chaos, without Emily. Mark stepped outside the courthouse and felt the cool air settle against his skin. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's choices. He walked slowly toward the parking lot, letting each breath steady his thoughts. He didn't think about revenge or regret. He didn't replay arguments or analyze every moment that had gone wrong. Instead, he focused on the quiet sense of closure that wrapped around him like a calm tide. Emily's downfall no longer mattered to him. Her mistakes, her lies, her chaos, they were chapters he had finally closed. He knew she would face her own consequences, but that journey wasn't his responsibility anymore. Mark got into his car and rested his hands on the steering wheel for a long moment. He felt something unfamiliar rise within him, peace. Not joy, not excitement, but a steady, grounding peace that told him he had survived something heavy. As he pulled onto the road, the city lights flickered to life around him. They felt like quiet reminders that life kept moving forward, and so would he. There was no dramatic ending, no grand revelation. Just a man finally free to rebuild, to breathe, and to choose a future unburdened by betrayal.